Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever time zone you are in. Thank you so much for joining this webinar on algorithm, the digital divide, polarization, and its impact to gender justice. We are so thrilled that you could join us and also listen in and interact with our experts in the field and also within the global connection of the organizers of this session. Thanking also and recognizing the organizers, the World Council of Churches, ACT, Church of Sweden, ACT Alliance, and the World Association of Christian Communicators. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Algorithms developed according to subjective criteria reflect the ongoing effects of colonization, racism, and systemic power imbalances, and exacerbate existing inequities and discrimination. This is how algorithms is defined from the manifesto in last 2021's Symposium on the Communication for Social Justice in a Digital Age, where the World Council of Churches has been a part of this. Access to digital communication has increased in the past 5 years specifically as well. And during this time of crisis, we have seen how digital communication, how digital technology have been used in good ways, where good practices have also emerged. Digital transformation has made it possible for us to connect over geographical distances, increased access to information, and has brought the world closer. However, digital transformation has also increased polarization in and between communities and people. Social media and algorithms have been used as instruments by populist actors for sharing fake news and manipulating narratives, increasing polarization in societies and reinforcing dividing differences that seem irreconcilable. And in all of this, we as churches and faith actors have seen how the people at the margins are targeted and used by these schemes, especially women, girls, children, and youth. This cannot go on. This parallel event will discuss about digitalization and its impact on gender justice. We will explore through our experts how we can counteract the negative effects by increased knowledge of how algorithms work and are used to create division and polarization. Our speakers will also encourage you and all of us to be more critical netizens and to offer practical tools on how to make the digital transformation a space for gatekeeping information. And to start with, I would like to give this time as well to my colleague, Nikki Ashwood, who is the program executive for Just Community for Women and Men at the World Council of Churches, who will give us the WCC vision in our participation and our engagement with the Commission and the Status of Women. And later, we will also hear our moderator, Erin Green, who will help facilitate the entire conversation of this session. So I will also introduce that Erin Green is a researcher and teacher who has spent nearly 15 years studying the social and ecological impact of artificial intelligence. Her recent publications include a digital justice study and action guide for the World Association of Christian Communicators and the World Council of Churches, and the upcoming chapter on AI for a handbook on digital theology and an edited collection on AI ethics and higher education is coming up. So I'll give this space now to my colleagues. I'm Joy Eva Bohol from the World Council of Churches, giving this time to colleagues Nikki Ashwood and to our moderator, Erin Green. Thank you. Welcome again.
Thank you so very much, Joy Eva. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, wherever you are in the world. As Joy Eva has indicated, I'm Reverend Nikki Ashwood, Program Executive for the Just Community of Women and Men, and responsible for the World Council of Churches Thursdays in Black campaign. Those of you who wonder why it is that we're gathered here, especially given the shrinking space for churches and faith-based organizations at the Commission of the Status of Women, you have every reason to have that question, but I also want to note that the Economic and Security Council has been hosting the Commission on Status of Women meetings since the mid-1940s. In like manner, the World Council of Churches has been deliberating on matters concerning women since its inception in 1948, when the brave women who gathered at that event, and I do mean brave, because there were very few women in relation to the number of men gathered, dared to question the likes of Karl Barth and Richard Hooft regarding the value of having women included in the deliberations of church and society at that time. In the 1990s, at the close of the World Council of Churches Ecumenical Decade of Churches in Solidarity with Women, we noted that there was need for the church to be actively heard and visible in addressing issues related to women, not only in the private sphere, but also being visibly involved in work to address issues related to women. We had been doing that before, but the Living Letters Project insists that we should not be on the sidelines of these conversations. This year, as the CSW looks at issues related to innovation and technology, we find that it is critical that the voice of the church be added to the conversation, as COVID-19 has proven to us that the concerns of women in media and cyberbullying be lifted up in the conversations around digital space innovations and the algorithmic divide. Friends, we thank you for joining us. We thank our very expert team and those who were part of the planning team for making this event available to us here in New York for the Commission on Status of Women, but also those of you who are gathered wherever you are. We recognize that this would not be possible were it not for us being gathered in the digital space. Welcome one and all. Over to you now, Erin. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for those warm words of welcome and for getting us off to a good start. Of course, the great blessing of ecumenical global fellowships and movements is that we're able to bring together so many different perspectives on an important topic. And while some of the claims that you will hear and learn about will be universal, all of these things affect people in different places differently. So it's wonderful to have a diversity of perspectives at the table. We will open with Dr. Antje Jackelin, who is the Archbishop and Primate of the Church of Sweden until 2022, and prior to that, the Bishop of the Diocese of Lund. She received her doctorate from the Lund University in Sweden and was an associate professor of systematic theology, religion and science at the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago from 2001 to 2007, as well as the director of the Zygon Center for Religion and Science. She has published several books and numerous articles, academic as well as popular in character. Her most recent books are God is Greater, Theology for the World, and a Swedish title that translates to Impatient in Hope, Theological Reflections in the Time of the Pandemic. She holds 3 honorary degrees and serves as the Nordic Vice President of the Lutheran World Federation and co-president of Religions for Peace. Archbishop Emerita Antje Jackelin, we are honored to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this kind introduction. And I'm very excited about the topic of this seminar, Algorithm, the Digital Divide and Polarization, and its impact on issues of gender equality. Polarization is one of the curses of our time. In fact, it is part of that dangerous cocktail of the 5 poisonous P's that some of you have heard me mention before. Polarization, populism, protectionism, post-truth, and patriarchy. Now, the good news is that digitalization holds potential of providing means to overcome the disastrous synergy of that toxic cocktail. It gives access to connectivity, education, and knowledge in unprecedented ways. Innovative technology can indeed be a game changer when it comes to achieving gender equality. A small example, AI-powered gender decoders help employers use gender-sensitive language to write job postings that are more inclusive and thus increase the diversity of their workforce. AI has the potential of being part of the solution for advancing gender equality in our societies. That's the good news. The bad news is we do not see this happen as it should. To the contrary, the way digitalization works often amplifies the workings and the effects of those poisonous peas. We see a digital gender divide. We see increasing digital poverty, and that poverty bears the face of women and girls. We see that the internet is not a safe place, in particular for girls, women, and LGBTQI persons. This does harm not only to individuals, but also to societies, since women and LGBTQI persons, especially if they are human rights defenders, are targeted and at risk of being silenced, even at risk of losing their lives. Female politicians and journalists run a higher risk of being forced into self-censorship or to quit their public engagement altogether. And we know that surveillance technology is not necessarily used to safeguard accessible and democratic spaces for all. It is even a favorite in the toolbox of authoritarian regimes. And we know that mental health problems among youth have increased dramatically since the broad introduction of the smartphone, and girls are overrepresented in that sad statistics. We also know that biases in algorithms can be discriminating and harmful. AI-generated patterns, predictions, and recommended actions are reflections of the accuracy, universality, and reliability of the data sets used, and the inherent assumptions and biases of the developers of the algorithms. And since only 1 out of 5 employees in AI is a woman, and since the overwhelming majority is young white guys, we sure are up for biases. Never before has a small group of designers, pretty young white guys in Silicon Valley, had the power to influence how billions of us think, act, and live our lives. Technology is changing what you do, how you think, who you are, and constantly tracking the slightest changes. Surveillance capitalism emerges as a new kind of marketplace. The merchandise are we. It is a trade in human futures, to use Shoshana Zuboff's expression. Our attention is a gold mine, allowing our minds to be mined. Research, including UNESCO's 2019 report, I'd Blush If I Could, Closing Gender Divides in Digital Skills Through Education, unambiguously shows that gender biases are found in AI data sets in general and in training data sets in particular. Algorithms and devices have the potential of spreading and reinforcing harmful gender stereotypes and disinformation. Considering the growing ubiquity of AI in our societies, such biases put women at risk of being left behind in economic, political, and social life. They will in fact perpetuate and exacerbate global backlash. We know that women are at a significantly higher risk of displacement due to job automation than men are. The majority of employees holding jobs that face a high risk of automation are women. It is therefore crucial that women are not left behind in terms of retraining and reskilling strategies to mitigate the impact of automation in terms of lost jobs. Moreover, there is a gender data gap. That is a lack of data referring to women. To me, it seems long ago that feminists pointed out that much of medical data is based on tests of young men in the military, and that generalizing those data puts other groups, especially women, at risk in both diagnosis and treatment of medical conditions. Nevertheless, the same mistakes are made over and over. Much of the data on which organizational, policy, or medical decisions are based appear to be biased in favor of men. Even decisions on issues that primarily affect women, like reproductive health, are often made without considering relevant data on women. Without taking into account gender, bias and discrimination will remain part of our systems, and machine learning will amplify them over time. Invisible Women, a book title by feminist advocate Caroline Criado Perez, remains ever more relevant, even in the digital age. The enormous possibilities of AI are accompanied by huge excitement, and rightly so. However, the greater the possibilities, the greater the need to ask critical and self-critical questions. What does AI do to our human self-understanding? Who is benefiting in the short run and in the long run? Who is paying the price in the short term and in the long term? How will AI be good for the little ones, those who Jesus used to move center stage, knowing that what is good for the little ones is often good for the good ones as well? Ethics must be part of the discussion right from the beginning. It is not good enough to just follow the trail and call upon the ethicist only to fix the problems we inevitably will run into. If we want to build and maintain democratic societies that are good for the citizens, ethics must be part of the whole journey. Ethics is a starting point and needs to be considered throughout the whole process and life cycle of an AI algorithm. So, digitalization and the development of AI force us to rethink common concepts such as trust, society, communication, and manipulation, human relationships, work, death, personal integrity, privacy. And the shift in the labor market from more people means growth to more data means growth is momentous. In fact, we will ask anew, what then is a human being? And like Pontius Pilate once did, we will also ask, what then is truth? Another way of putting this, as important as the STEM sector is, it can never be our savior. It needs dialogue with and guidance from the great traditions of culture and religion, or else it will not contribute to the flourishing of humankind and this planet. So this is indeed time for joint transdisciplinary reflection on how AI develops and will affect people's lives, societies around the world, and the planet as such. And I'm very happy that this joint reflection is going to happen right here and right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Archbishop, for getting us off to a great start by touching on nearly every major issue relating to artificial intelligence, including, of course, the ecological impact, the social impact, and of course, understanding that this is a problem that is not just about the application of artificial intelligence, but about how it is structured, how the research is designed, where we find the sources of data, and even fundamentally the kinds of questions that we bring to bear on artificial intelligence. So thank you for that. So to all of those who are joining us online, of course, we want to include you in the conversation. So if you have remarks and comments as you're listening to any of the interventions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will have some moments coming up where we will have a little bit more discussion with you, where I'll read some of your questions out loud. So please, as you think of something, please put it in the chat, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. In a moment, we are going to turn to several other speakers. So we have colleagues from around the world that are joining us. I will introduce all of them now. I think that's easiest, and then I will come to each of you with a short question for further consideration, and then we will have some time with the audience. So I would like to introduce Gladys Naruba. She is a program officer for Fight Extreme Inequality with Dan Church Aid in Uganda. She's also a co-chair for ACT Alliance Africa Gender Community of Practice and a co-chair for Side by Side, a faith movement for gender justice. Gladys holds a Master of Science in International Public Policy and has extensive experience promoting gender justice, including advocacy for progressive family law in Uganda. So thank you so much, Gladys. I will come to you shortly with a question. We also have Reverend Marvia Laws, and she is a Caribbean womanist, historical theologian, public theologian, gender specialist, and advocate for children, youth, and persons living with HIV/AIDS, racial justice, and climate justice. She's an accomplished communicator. Reverend Laws worked with Love FM as a broadcaster and has been a blogger for almost 20 years. Congratulations. Reverend Laws has facilitated several discourses around the intersection of church and media. So Marvia, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We also have Reverend Dr. Matthew Robinson. He is the leader of Theological Digital Communication Hub and the director of Intercultural Department at the Protestant Theological Faculty at Bonn University. His research and teaching focus on theology in relation to social ethics. He uses historical, digital humanities, and qualitative methods in ecumenical and intercultural perspectives to analyze theological knowledge production. So Matthew, thank you for joining us. We have two more guests with us from two other parts of the world. Emma Rahman hails from Trinidad and Tobago. Her role as an assistant producer on a weekly 30-minute televised program called Moments of Inspiration. She coordinates the production for filming and works to curate thematic or liturgical-based series. Additionally, Emma creates digital media and edits videos for Christian Council of Trinidad and Tobago. In the 11th Assembly of the World Council of Churches, she led a workshop along ministers of religion from the Caribbean, focused on Caribbean spirituality in the digital world. Her interests and advocacy lie in the intersectionality of justice. Thank you so much, Emma. And then finally, we have Amanda Stratum. She is a senior program manager for Code Africa's Civic Signal, a program that uses machine learning tools to monitor the way media report on topics of interest, such as coverage of women politicians. She trains journalists in African countries on the use of open software for fact-checking mis and disinformation and digital security. In 2021, she managed a team that adapted and translated PEN America's online harassment field manual for Francophone West Africa. Her interests are digital ethics and machine learning with a focus on natural language programming. So a wonderful range and depth of experience that has joined us today. So I'm eager to hear from each of you. So we have small questions just to kind of stimulate further reflection on some of the themes that have been introduced. So I would like to return to our keynote speaker first and ask to hear a little bit more about what the role of churches and other faith-based organizations might be in the increasing polarized communication and uprising of fake news.
Well, I do think that, first of all, in the church, all important questions have space and should have a space. And of course, since questions raised by artificial intelligence and digitalization in general are of such great importance for the world, for so many people, they should be also they deserve great attention from the churches. And since the church's mandate is always to listen especially carefully to those who suffer, to those who are disadvantaged, to those who are pushed to the margins, we need to be careful to listen, especially to the dark and negative sides, and try to bring the message to those in power that, hi, if you want to really be successful, you need to be inclusive. You need to mitigate the risks, and you need to be aware that this is not an issue for technology alone. It is also, we need to bring together the best we have as humanity. That is technology and science, but it's also policies. It is actually business life. It is culture and philosophy, and it is religion, because this has to do with trust, with who we are, our values. So I think it is task of the church to also have a voice in the public space. As always, it is theological, it's prophetic, it's diaconal, and it's pastoral.
So I will turn the floor over then to Emma and Gladys and have them do their short intervention, and the floor is theirs. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So the questions directed to Gladys and I, the first one is, how does one become a reconciliatory voice in times of digital polarization, discrimination, and biases? Becoming a reconciliatory voice first requires that we understand why this is needed. Digital polarization doesn't begin with issues of the internet. It doesn't begin with problems because of social media. Instead, it begins with a need for more access to technical innovation for women and girls, education and empowerment of marginalized groups, including women and girls. Digital polarization, as Reverend said, is a product of the digital divide that has left women behind yet again. And this refers to marginalizing people who cannot benefit from technological advancement. Some people benefit from the advancements of digital technology, but others are ostracized, left out, and left behind. One example of digital polarization is algorithmic bias. One can argue that we all have biases. Biases are something that makes us human. We are biased towards specific types of music, certain types of food, which is innately human. Thus, AI and algorithms are biased since the people who created them are biased. However, Internet Studies scholar and professor of gender studies and African American studies, Dr. Safia Umuja Noble posits in her book, Algorithms of Oppression, there is a missing social and human context in some types of algorithmically driven decision-making. And this matters for everyone engaging with these types of technologies in everyday life. Algorithmic biases in technology are affecting us on a personal level. However, using the phrases algorithmic oppression and algorithmic discrimination has different connotations to the word bias. Words such as discrimination and oppression represent more accurately the negative and often marginalizing experiences for groups of people, usually women, people of color, and other marginalized groups. Dr. Noble argues that algorithmic oppression privileges whiteness and discriminates against people of color, specifically women. This occurs because, as Reverend mentioned earlier, the majority of tech developers are white cis men. Thus, algorithmic oppression and algorithmic discrimination are more beneficial terms to describe the dangerous implications of biased technology. Having outlined these pitfalls of digital polarization, digital discrimination, and the importance of language used towards these issues, how could we become a reconciliatory voice? To be a reconciliatory voice means that we must first act in accordance with the will of God and to restore right relations with all of humanity. This means finding out the injustice and the imbalances of power. Churches are an institution, and in many societies, an institution that is highly regarded and trusted. Thus, churches can leverage their institutional power and utilize prophetic voices to advocate, educate, and empower from the top down, but more integrally from the grassroots. Through education, women and girls who have limited access or no access to ICT could be reached. Different countries have diverse cultural nuances, thus tailoring educational initiatives to address these experiences for local women and girls is essential. Education on digital discrimination and how to overcome algorithmic biases such as this webinar is also important. And furthermore, holding discussions on the myths of ubiquitous technology can empower women and girls when navigating technology. Churches can become spaces to understand the needs of marginalized groups of people. Churches can become active facilitators between local communities and develop digital technology initiatives to research technological uses in local areas. This process recognizes the shortcomings of technology today, having been created by a particular group of people that has been excluding a large representation of our population that is very diverse. This means connecting grassroots methodologies and findings with technological development, which leads to my third point, the inclusion of women and girls and youth from different contexts and regions in discussions and decision-making processes regarding technological development and implementation. Churches can become primary actors and advocates in achieving this reality by engaging with women and girls in their community. The second question, what power does civil society have to subvert the algorithmic biases behind gender-based injustice, including social media platforms? And to respond to this question, I would use a case study from Trinidad and Tobago. I am part of a group called the Sold Out Servants Youth Missions, and it is an arm of the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago, which works for social justice and encourages and supports youth engagement on outreach initiatives. SOS is run by youth of PCTT on a voluntary basis under the supervision of the General Secretary of the Synod of the Presbyterian Church and ministers of the PCTT through voluntary consulting. SOS uses digital platforms of Instagram and Facebook primarily to raise awareness through educational posts on issues contextual to Trinidad and Tobago. During the pandemic, SOS conducted a series of online webinars, similar to this one, on various pertinent topics in the context of Trinidad and Tobago. Furthermore, SOS's mission extends to the underprivileged communities in Trinidad and Tobago. This is in the form of food and clothes drives, house construction, animal and environmental initiatives, and book drives. In 2021, SOS embarked on a book drive project because the poverty crisis and high rates of unemployment affecting Trinidad and Tobago because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We requested book donations via our social media platforms that were gently used during the academic year prior. And these announcements were also made in churches. And this was in order to redistribute these books to students in need. However, the response based on our engagement through social media is not representative of our reach. Our social media posts gained 22 likes for a maximum. However, the response based on over 500 books were collected and over 50 parents reached out to request books for multiple children. Furthermore, women in more rural communities with access to internet and WhatsApp or Facebook collected book lists from families nearby and sent them to us. They acted as micro-organizers within communities that they were based. The book drive posts were shared on closed Facebook groups, which also received much engagement. But this engagement was not in the form of likes, shares, or comments. They were through calls, WhatsApp messages, and direct messages. When speaking to some of these parents, the majority of women, which were 94%, who contacted us, indicated further needs to us. For example, for stationery, notebooks, and even devices for students. This was to ensure that they would be able to access online classes. The scope of our outreach changed based on the needs of those of whom we were in contact with. Around 5 women who contacted us expressed their need for further assistance. All of these women indicated at various times in our contact with them that they were victims of domestic and gender-based violence. Some had already left their perpetrators with children, while others were trying to build and create a home, and others were still living with children and perpetrators. The intervention of pastoral care by our ministers was necessary in some cases, and we have remained in contact with these women. But this shows that the engagement of our posts were far from viral. Yet, we were able to engage with individuals through social media on our posts, not through the normal methods of likes, comments, or shares, but through subversive methods of speaking via direct messages, calls, and WhatsApps that they felt comfortable to reach out to us. Social media trends and viral stories indicate that likes, shares, and comments are necessary for content to be shared and for content to be impactful. But I would argue that grassroots methodologies and engagement with local communities subvert algorithmic bias and marginalization through the use of direct messages, closed groups on Facebook, and who knows what else. This case study demonstrates a counter-social understanding of social media engagement. And it shows that they are not as important as we might believe. But truthfully, empowering initiatives working towards the Missio Dei can be digitally promoted and impactful without becoming viral. Thank you.
Emma, thank you so much. It's always great to hear these, personal case studies that are really kind of at the smallest level, because when we talk about big tech and big data, it seems like it's this insurmountable wave of negativity, of force of evil. And so it's wonderful to see you subvert that and to use it in a really kind of humble and meaningful way that is connected not only to digital justice, but to other forms of justice, like fighting poverty and gender justice and meeting needs in the local communities. So thank you for that really humble and strong note of hope to fuel us towards the next intervention. So I will ask then that Gladys offers something to the room, and so I will turn the floor over to her at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think recognition of digital innovations as a force for good is the first step in increase, especially because it increases opportunities for women and girls in the area of improved healthcare, financial inclusion, access to education, and participation, especially in democratic processes. And of course, it also creates new ways of working. Allow me to echo what many have said in this particular space, that digital innovations are a two-edged sword, in one promoting opportunity and inclusion, and in another creating a divide, making the digital divide the new face of inequality. There are risks of wider exclusion, especially for women and girls, where forms of and patterns of discrimination within the physical space are being manifested in the online spaces, especially in access to information, access to work, and other opportunities that have become digitally driven, but also in terms of freedom of expression and association. That context shows increased traction to digital social media platforms for information. For instance, we no longer depend on the structured media houses to access breaking news. The information is in our faces as soon as one opens a social media application. And of course, we are also seeing that mainstream traditional media is quickly transitioning to the digital spaces for them to remain relevant. As they maintain the structured media programming, it is also increasingly informed by what is happening in the new public space, the online space. Important for us to note is that the public space has shifted and we are not prepared as faith actors. If we are not prepared as faith actors, then there will be a missing link. One, we miss out on shaping debates and also do what our values require us to do, of challenging inequality, being voices of truth, justice, healing, forgiveness, and love. And as it is space, will be open for spreading hate, misinformation, and online violence against women in the public. So how can we use this space to be the reconciliatory voices? One, just like Emma has said, is to understand our biases and preconceived perceptions that go beyond just the global South divide and the global North divide. We need to look at the divide around religion, the divide around race, tribal, economic, and education status. A quick place to look at is the information that we consume, especially on social media. Most of it objectifying women, some of it including racial slurs or promoting hate speech. We also need to recognize that while our different roles are restricted to a region, especially for the ecumenical actors within this space, or country or a faith group, the digital space gives us a wider burden and a responsibility. And this might mean that as ecumenical actors under World Council of Churches or the ACT Alliance, that we also look at the interfaith and the global burden that this particular space brings for us. So this also means that we need to speak up where we stand a better chance to be heard than the oppressed, especially within these particular digital spaces. The other is using our positions and lived experiences as insight into the lives of those that we work with or whose voices we seek to amplify. For example, in the areas of policy towards digital inclusion, privacy laws, safety and security legislations, especially those that work for women and children. The other is for us to provide space for dialogue and for people to share their lived experiences to counter misinformation, hate speech, and build a culture of tolerance in the space that is not moderated. For example, there are a number of spaces that we can utilize as faith-based actors. For example, Twitter spaces, Facebook Live, and other spaces for moderated discussions or debates. The other that is key is for us to invest in research to build our legitimacy and credibility, information that is factual, statistics that can be fact-checked. And of course, it's also important with the experiences that we have had with the COVID-19, where faith actors have also gone online, ensuring that we are in that space and use our values to moderate the spaces. In terms of the second question, how does this look like? Gender equal participation look like in our organizations? I would look at this in 4 ways. One, when we look at gender equal participation can be looked at in lenses of those we work with in our organizations or communities in terms of opportunity, risks, education, work, and access to social services. This works in the greater scheme of access, availability, and affordability of quality digital innovations for men and women. And when we analyze this, we can as well sum up the extent of unequal participation or equal participation if that's what we are aiming for. In terms of access and utilization, it's also important for us to be cognizant of the required skills and knowledge to effectively use technology. For instance, most women are not likely to benefit from technological advancement due to lack of skills to compete within the knowledge economy. But when we look at affordability, it's also important for us to be aware that some of the global South countries in which we are working have some of the highest costs of internet or even high costs of gadgets that enable access to digital spaces, even much more expensive for communities that we are working with beyond the elites that are working in the spaces, for example, in our organizations. And of course, if we look at availability, we also need to look at communities where infrastructure is not yet well developed. To bring such communities into digital spaces requires more financial or capital investment, and this also affects their financial inclusion, political participation, access to information, and these communities remain invisible and unrepresented on the online spaces. The other that I can look at is the quality. The COVID-19 pandemic and the aggressive shift to work from home was not only exhausting for colleagues in the Global South, but also colleagues within the Global North, where we spent half the time checking if we can hear each other, with even much more implications for communities whose access to life-saving services were suspended. And in line with this particular theme for CSW 67, it is important to look at the design of digital innovations to ensure accessibility and know-how as the baseline for inclusion, embedding skills building, awareness, education, and reflecting the different yet unique needs both women and men have, and between the Global South and the Global North. And of course, we cannot leave out the issues around safety and security, especially for women and girls, which remains a challenge. This has to be factored in while determining the choice of the technology-based applications, especially those that we use in our interventions as organizations for communication, in enabling access to communities that we serve, as well as including privacy and safety of human rights defenders that we support. However, as actors, we also need to be aware that digital innovations may bring new risks for work, given the cutthroat competition, for instance, the risk of making paid maternity leave to disappear because of the new technology that is competitive. Thank you so much.
Gladys, thank you so much for your contribution. You've touched on two really, really important issues that keep coming up, not only when we talk about the algorithm, but when we talk about digital justice broadly. And that's the question of education and the questions about accessibility. So, there are so many ways that we can describe the churches and faith-based organizations, and having a pedagogical, a teaching function is so important, that we can kind of coordinate and draw on our resources to offer people the digital skills, the digital literacy skills they need to be safe online and to use it in kind of ways that promote the flourishing of, women everywhere. And then on the other hand, you named something really important, that, questions about access and affordability are significant. And we see that, AI and all of the related digital technologies are prompting new kinds of digital divides. And one of them is about the intensive cost and lack of access that very many people in this world have. It's easy for me to hop on a Zoom call and have these kind of conversations, but many of my sisters around the world are faced with rolling blackouts or really expensive internet surveillance, and other things that kind of really restrict the freedom to move in these digital spaces and pursue digital justice. So thank you so much for bringing those two themes to our attention. So at the conclusion of these first two shorter interventions, we're going to take a moment just to respond to a few questions in the chat. So if you have something that you would like to offer to this online conversation, please don't hesitate to use the question function in Zoom to add your question. We have one question here from Sojun Kim, and it's about prevention. So a lot of what we see is about responding to digital gender injustice online and in digital spaces. So we are, as Sojun Kim is asking about what the churches and faith-based organizations could do to proactively prevent gender-based violence, microaggressions, discrimination on social media, that are often taken too lightly. So how do we kind of prevent it before it happens from the perspective of churches and faith-based organizations? So I'll turn it over to any of the 5 invited speakers at this moment to offer a quick response. Gladys, I see that your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the question. And I think just to re-echo again what everyone has said, that the solutions that we are using in the physical space should be the same solutions that we are adopting in the online spaces. And this also means that one, being able to offer support to those that are affected, one, to moderate the spaces, but also to ensure that as faith leaders, we also contribute to the policy and legislative frameworks, whether at the local level. So sorry about the background. Can you hear me well? Yes, so that means that we will not just talk about prevention within our spaces, but we'll also get involved in the legal and institutional frameworks framing within our countries, but also at the global level.
Would any of the other contributors like to respond to how can we prevent gender-based violent harassment online in digital spaces? Don't be shy, otherwise I'll call on you. Marvia, go ahead.
Yes,
please.
Aaron, thank you. Well, for me, I would say from a faith-based perspective, we have to begin in our own communities. And I'm talking even within, perhaps more specifically from the Caribbean and the Jamaican context, where it has already been established that some of the violence that we see against women is undergirded by teachings that persons have received from Scripture. The way we have been socialized and raised as Christians, the way we have been Christianized, to believe in misinterpretations and misapplications of texts that speak of submission. And of course, all of that is undergirded by what Antia mentioned earlier, the matter of patriarchy. And so we can begin there. So in order for us to advocate for and to create spaces that are safe, that we ourselves have safe spaces, we have to begin offline. Because what we see online is a reflection of what is happening offline. We're taking the same attitudes, the same biases, etc., to the online space. So here in our church communities, faith communities, we can begin there to begin to teach gender equality, women's empowerment, and to teach against violence against women, stand up for adopting things like Thursdays in Black, campaigns such as these and others, that we will begin to teach and train generations to come and address the issues that exist now, to speak truth and to correct the oppressions that are taking place.
Thank you so much, Marvia. So we've heard now a little bit from the grassroots perspective about what we can do a little bit in local communities and how we can reach people around us for the sake of gender justice in the face of the encroachment of AI in our lives. And now we're going to turn to explicitly faith-based perspectives. So we've just heard from Marvia, and we will return to her, and then Matthew will follow. So Marvia, I would ask that you take the floor. Oh, and you have slides. Excellent. And we will enjoy hearing a little bit more about the kind of work that you are doing in.
All right, thank you so very much. Thank you. It is a pleasure for me to be here sharing, and I truly appreciate the opportunity. As was shared earlier, I began blogging in 2005 when I was serving as a missional pastor in Panama, Colon City, Panama. And I can say from back then, all the signs were there in terms of the dominant voices that occupied the online space, the voices that were carrying sway, that the fundamentalism was there, the ultra-conservatism was there, the aggressions were there, the bullying was evident, all of these things were present. And I would dare say that a more muted presence was that of the more liberal voices, the more egalitarian voices, the peace building, peace promoting voices were the more muted voices. And what we have seen now, well, by the time we got to 2016 into 2020, I feel arose as a result of opportunities that faith communities would have missed. Speaking from my context, as I got engaged in blogging and later on working in media, I sought then to carry this information that I would have gleaned over the years to my context. And one of the ways that I believe that this is helpful is for the church or faith communities to understand that every single issue that is facing the world or we're challenged by, all of them require collaboration. They're bigger than one person and individuals going out on their own. The kind of resources that we need to tackle the social justice issues requires that we work together. So faith communities should connect with technological spaces, and technological spaces, I believe, should be open to. They are not mutually exclusive. In fact, church and faith communities can in fact become technological communities themselves, because technological communities or tech spaces really speaks to physical or virtual spaces. Simplified explanations for clarity's sake, and the conversation can continue around them. We're talking about physical or virtual environments where technology-related activities take place. Physical, we're speaking of computer labs. We're talking about data centers where research is conducted, development is done. Virtual spaces, as has already been mentioned in presentations, online forums, social media platforms, video conferencing tools, such as one that we're using right now. And these spaces, I believe, as I said, are not mutually exclusive. They can be integrated in our own ministry and mission opportunities as well. So an example of that is my own context. This is the Sligoville Baptist Multipurpose Center. And what you're looking at is where I serve. This is where I pastor, the Sligoville Circuit of Baptist Churches, 3 churches, but this is the oldest of the congregations. Founded in 1829, we are located in what is considered the first free village in Jamaica. What does that mean? After emancipation, the missioners, the first missionary who was here at the time, James Philippo, along with friends such as the Quakers, other colleagues such as the Methodists and so on, they began to consider ways in which they would empower the newly freed enslaved persons. And this concept of a free village saw where the church, through its resources, bought land and allowed the enslaved persons to purchase those lands. Additionally, the enslaved persons of their own means as well use their own agency to acquire lands. This was critical, not only for them to have somewhere to live, to plant their fields and to provide for their families, but it was also important for them to be able to vote, because without possessing land at that time, you could not cast your vote in the Jamaican society. So this was really a powerful means by which persons gained their own autonomy and their own independence and could work as free individuals in forming and shaping the new Jamaican society. So Sligoville Baptist Church has always seen as a core aspect of its mission, education. And that literally meant literacy and numeracy skills. Fast forward to 2019, when I started here as pastor, I recognized that the world was indeed changing, and the skills that I would have brought with me and the knowledge that would have been imparted over the years as it relates to the world that we're living in, a digital world that is emerging. I recognize that our church, being a small church in a rural community, is in fact a representative of the majority of our churches with an aging population. But that doesn't mean we can't minister. We have so many children in our congregations, and these children are heading off to high school sooner or later, and many of them need assistance with homework and all those skills around education. We then decided that we were going to continue our mission differently. And then COVID-19 hit in 2020. This building was started in 2020. It's not yet complete, because we still have the interior and so on to do. But I put it here as an example for those who are in context similar to mine, without a lot of the resources, the small resources, fighting against big data and big tech. But we have a big heart and we serve a big God. So through faith and courage, we set out to put up a multi-purpose center. And this multi-purpose center is intended to continue our mission of education and empowerment in our communities, and particularly for girls, because we have issues with teen pregnancy, which is high in our context as well. So, you know, we have dropouts of school, and we need to empower, reskill, upskill, all these things that need to be done to help persons to get back on their feet and to move forward in life. So as we envision what this would do, one, there'll be a computer lab. So we're talking about physical tech space. There, and from the computer lab, we will also be facilitating homework centers where children who are in vulnerable situations can come and find a safe space in which they will get assistance with their homework. Many of our persons who teach do not reside in the area, but distance education. From where they are, they can teach, and persons who have problems with accessing the device or accessing internet will have a space they can come and receive the information from someone who's teaching remotely from another location. Additionally, we have been approached by the Member of Parliament. So you see government, church, state working together to provide continuing education for teens who would have dropped out of school and are not able to access job opportunities because they need that kind of certification. So we will be providing the Ministry of Education curriculum for those who would have missed out on their Caribbean examination, which is our CXC examinations, which would be like your high school leaving examinations onward to college. So I'm giving you all of that so you can understand how we would then see how churches, faith communities could collaborate with tech spaces. This is an example, and these are the things that I feel that we are able to do from our space. Even as I said, our focus is on education and training. Number one, we can raise awareness. Faith communities connecting with tech communities can leverage their platforms. We have a platform, and it doesn't matter if it's shrinking, we still have captive audiences. We have a following, we have members, and not just our members who are, our subscribers, so to speak, but the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that our membership no longer sits in front of us, but we connect with persons beyond our buildings and in places, far-flung places that we would never have imagined we would have had to reach before. So we should leverage our platforms to educate membership and communities we serve on the importance of digital rights for women, in as much as that's a topic we're talking about, but do not see this as separate from partnering with students, professionals in your membership, technology groups and organizations to provide resources on issues such as privacy, security, autonomy, freedom of speech, identity in general, and specifically those biases that impact women, minority, and marginalized groups. Not only are we keen on raising awareness, but I believe that we should be engaged in advocacy. We can plug into these communities, merge, partner with each other to engage in advocacy. Advocacy is essential because we need to be able to change things at the policy level, where decisions and policies are being made, laws are being passed, and these are going to impact the lives of individuals. I believe that as faith communities, we should have a seat at the table. And in my own instance, as Reverend Nikki Ashwood would tell you, I have had to be pushing myself, inserting myself in our national space. And thankfully, our government, our Ministry of Gender, Youth, and Information is quite open, and I've received the overtures, and in fact, was able to endorse my presence in attending one of the CSW sessions leading up to this at this moment. So faith communities should not sit back and wait for things to happen, but should begin to make overtures to see how we can get in the space to have our voices being heard and to make our presence felt, that we too are concerned about these issues, because the matters that are impacting our women and girls and minority groups are not just issues for people out there, it's for all of us. Additionally, we are engaging in training and education, and this is what faith communities ought to be engaging as well. This could be the ways that you learn what is happening, educate yourself as a faith community. However, you could also embed this in an existing program, such as I've shared before as the Sligoville model. You might have in place skills training facilities, continuing education facilities, homework centers, aftercare opportunities. Use the opportunities we have. You do not need to create something new. Look at what you have and see how you can embed in those spaces the kind of knowledge that needs to be imparted for empowerment and capacity building. Before I leave that, we should also see too that as a church, we have not only platform, but we have space, facilities, physical plants that should now become more than just a gathering place on a Sunday morning, but serves multiple purposes and can facilitate training and education and empowerment as well. We should
Marvia, we're going to have to come and visit you in Jamaica and study with you. You have so much to share. Could you kindly just make maybe one more point, and then we'll have
support, provide support, and finally collaborate to innovate, meaning build apps or provide services that will promote digital rights, teach and train about privacy, security, autonomy, and all those things that are necessary for persons to be safe online. Basically, that's it.
Marvia, that was wonderful. I'm so sorry to cut it short. I know you have so much to offer, and we all have so much to learn from you. We're going to now hear a word from Matthew, and then we will move into our final and third section on really some tools that the folks who have joined us online today can take away. So Matthew, over to you, about 10 minutes, and then we'll move to the final section of our time together. Thank you.
Thank you so much also for the invitation to join this important conversation and for the opportunity to learn, to get to know and to learn from the co-panelists who are such visionary leaders in so many different contexts, church, society, education. And so I feel very privileged to be able to join you all today. In my daily life, I lead the Department of Intercultural Theology here in Bonn at the Protestant Theological Faculty. But you can also see that I am wearing a clerical collar and am ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA. And so since I have been invited to share a faith-based perspective in the next few minutes, I'd like to reflect on really some rudimentary theological issues that strike me as important when we think about digital justice for women and girls. Beginning with a sociological observation, reflection, some of this is now, we've heard this from other panelists already, but here's the thing. I'll be honest that I'm not that optimistic about these matters right now. I don't personally think, but maybe that's my personality, that faith-based communities often influence the development of things like the AI algorithms that are used in digital communication and commerce settings, very much, at least not on a direct technical level. But the good news is that's not where the problem starts anyway. It's not where its roots lie. Algorithms, as we've heard already from other panelists, show discriminatory bias and indeed promote or reproduce oppressions against women and girls because those same gaps and biases and oppressions persist in the society. So LinkedIn, this was an example from not too long ago, but offered high-powered and better-paying jobs to men more than to women, even after the algorithm was told to ignore information and data about gender, because it turned out men were applying for jobs above their qualification level at a higher rate than women were. And so the algorithm then responded to this presence, this gender bias and difference in the society, and then reflected that in the jobs it was recommending to its users. Or voice assistants like Alexa and Siri were made with women's voices. And of course, you can choose men's voices, but the default at least has been women's voices. And why? Well, because stereotypes persist in our society that associate things like care and support and service with women. A Google search for schoolboy and for schoolgirl will return very different and alarming results. Online translation tools like DeepL show gender bias in translating words like, for example, doctor from English into, for example, German as Arzt, which is masculine, instead of Ärztin, which is feminine. Algorithms discriminate in marginalizing and oppressive ways because the society still preserves discriminatory attitudes against women and girls in its pre-reflective imaginations of sex, gender, and of the relationships of sex and gender to societal roles and institutions in family, in educational, scientific, civic, economic, and political settings and structures. So the first point is that in order to work on the algorithms, we'll have to work on the society. Of course, that is not a new insight from me, but seems to be a crucial starting point from my perspective. AI algorithm performance depends on how extensively it is trained. I'm sure that all of us here are familiar with this on at least a basic level, but if you want an algorithm that can identify kittens in pictures, then, if you wanted to identify pictures of kittens that it has never seen before, then it needs to be trained on a database of as many pictures of kittens as possible, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures, so that when it sees a new picture that it has never encountered, it can correctly identify kitten. The idea is that when a program is given new data that it has never processed before, then on the basis of the other data that it has already processed, the program can determine something like consistency or lack of consistency between the new data, not in the training base, and the data that was in the training database. Now, I would highlight that word consistency. What goes in determines what comes out. So let us reflect on this a bit theologically for a moment, both systematic theologically and practical theologically. The ways that an algorithm includes and excludes information correlates to the determinations it makes about what else to count, what else to mark as valid, what else to mark as relevant, but also what else to mark as not relevant, what to exclude. Now, this is not unique to the functioning of algorithms. We could, in fact, articulate a sociological theorem more broadly to describe this dynamic. We could say what we include and exclude produces the society we see. And that's the problem with algorithmic bias, right? Is that it produces the things, and in a direction, then it preserves biases, gaps, and discriminatory judgments that it draws from its training material. How can we engage with this sociological theorem in Christian theological terms? And what difference would that make for how Christian groups approach these issues? I can offer one possible approach in brief, one that I hope also holds strong ecumenical, possibly interreligious, and civic potential. As human beings, we come to know ourselves first and foremost, I would suggest, by means of relationships. The relationships we find ourselves in with other persons. And these relationships are relationships of dependency and interdependency. We learn from a very early age that we do not make and sustain ourselves by ourselves. And as we grow and mature, we recognize that those individuals and communities on whom we depend, well, they also did not make or develop or sustain themselves by themselves, but they likewise exist in networks of interdependent relationship. And we can extend this realization to the outer limits of historical time and nature, leading us finally to confess with the psalm writer of Psalm 100, verse 3b, we have not made ourselves. Now, this acknowledgement, what I take to be a very human, non-religious acknowledgement, sits at the core of our being, and I would describe it as an acknowledgement of having been created, of creatureliness, we might say. In Christian theology, human beings belong in and with the rest of creation, and it is seen as good, and indeed very good, that we do. In other words, however, that very good is a description of being creature in interdependence with all other creatures in ways that promote mutual flourishing. The denial or rejection of this interdependent belonging the striving to marshal power and sovereignty unto oneself, or for oneself and one's own group alone. This is what Christian theology calls sin and evil. In the Hebrew Bible, the word often used is at once more simple and more profound. It is the word harm. The structure of God's very good is interdependent belonging and inclusion, while the structure of evil is the harmful denial that we belong together and the violence of exclusion. That was my systematic theological thought. Now to a practical theological reflection on an ethics of inclusion, as Archbishop Jacqueline had already indicated. I've been asked to talk about countercultural resistance in our constituencies, was the question. And I would place the emphasis slightly differently and talk about the cultivation of a community of mutual flourishing and interdependence, or what in theological terminology we might call the work of the church. The Christian church is tasked with giving witness to that very good order of creaturely interdependence in the ways we conduct ourselves and the ways that we form our community life. And this calls us to attend to the cultivation of an ethics of inclusion and empowerment for all persons. What we include and exclude produces the societies in which we live. That was the sociological theorem already referring to the way the algorithms produce also, or function also. Similarly, we might say, those who participate in the cultivation of community produce the community that is cultivated. We ought therefore to be especially attentive to systems and structures that include some and exclude others, and most attentive to social locations of multiple overlapping exclusions. Why? It is not, I would suggest, something to be rooted in theological anthropology, the dignity of the individual, but rather the dignity of the individual itself is deeply dependent on creaturely interdependence, on structures of good mutual flourishing. For people of Christian faith, when we think about these things from a perspective of creatureliness, we can see how important it is that the capabilities and contributions of all God's creatures be affirmed and incorporated. Flourishing for all depends on it. In closing, I would offer simply two principles of an ethics of inclusion rooted in this concept of creaturely interdependence and belonging for challenge and reflection. Neither of them are novel or innovative. I'm afraid they are rather boring, but each of us can perhaps implement them in creative ways, as Emma already gave us a wonderful example of, and Mavia about the church in Jamaica. First, inclusion and representation. From civic leadership structures to political decision makers to program designers, and no less the material that we use to train the algorithms by which the programs run, what is put in determines what comes out. And if women's voices and agency are excluded from the beginning of the process, it will not suddenly and magically be reflected in the outcomes of those processes. It is no less crucial that men and women are equally represented in our church's digital engagements, whether denominational leadership committees or the social media team of a particular congregation. Inclusion, however, and this is the second point, mutuality and voluntariness. Inclusion, however, ought to be cultivated in communities characterized by mutuality. In other words, no inclusion without contribution and without conscription. What I mean is participation is meaningless if people are not allowed to contribute anything, if they are present to represent in a token manner some particular community. That's not doing anything. Furthermore, so it must be mutual. There has to be an actual agency of participation and decision-making power in the participation. But if that participation is forced, and this is also a difficulty sometimes too, when we find, working in a university context here, that in the name of promoting women's participation, all of a sudden they get dumped on with tons and tons and tons of extra duties because they have to be the diversity person in 20 different committees or something.
Matthew, we're gonna need to wrap up quite soon. I do see some questions that are directly related to your talk, and I want to make sure that we have time to come back to them. So could you just take a moment to tie everything together, please, quickly?
Sure. Inclusion and representation, but mutual and voluntary. So my final sentence would just be this then. Disciplined cultivation of mutuality and voluntariness challenges us to make our physical and digital participation structures open and accessible, and therefore more diverse, transparent, and open to revision. And in all of these ways, we can cultivate a more flourishing community of creaturely interdependence. Punkt.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And as I mentioned, I see some great questions relating to the nature of inclusion and how as churches we can, both be a barrier and, a facilitator of inclusion. So hopefully we'll have time to come back to some of these ideas. Now, in the third and last part of our time together, we have tools, we have takeaway, we have little nuggets for you to inspire your own journey of gender justice in digital spaces. So I am going to turn it over to Amanda Stratum. Amanda, you have about 15 minutes for your time together, and I would really like to have a moment for some more discussion after that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. I will try and keep it to much shorter than 15 minutes. It's quite a struggle to join everyone afterwards who have given such insightful and fantastic presentations. So I really wanted to focus a lot more on some very practical tips to keep in mind for people who are specifically journalists and activists who are harassed online. And that can be both in a very practical sort of physical way of protecting yourself, as well as very sort of digital steps you can take in order to make sure that you're less targeted as such, without taking away your actual voice online. Very interestingly, what I've taken from all the talks today is the idea of keeping community, kind of making sure that there's this very strong community that you fit in with, and that provides this support system for the people for the person who or rather for the people that surround you, essentially. And one of the things that alongside some of the work we've done training people in digital security has really been about ensuring that your practical environment is safe. And that includes having a support system, a group probably of women that you're going to find, or a group of allies that you identify as kind of your people who make sure that they look after one another ahead of a story being published that might trigger harassment, or ahead of a campaign that gets launched that could possibly make you vulnerable to targeted or online harassment. It's really important to kind of have that community together and to ahead of time plan, what is your response going to be? Is everyone going to have a sort of standard response that they're going to give online possibly, or is there an idea of like sort of shutting down and not responding to trolls, but really having that plan in place really makes that you can kind of physically prepare for it, as well as mentally prepare yourself and the support network that you have with you. So back to the practical tips. There are a few things. Firstly, the ICFJ, I think 2 years ago, released a report about women in technology, specifically women journalists and activists who work online. And more than 60% indicated that they were targeted, targeted harassment, and specifically aimed at gendered harassment. So it's not, essentially you're not alone in these circumstances, and it means that your kind of personal protection needs to be so much stronger. One of them, really quite an obvious one, but is something that in the training that we do, it still comes up, is setting up things like two-factor authentication on all your social accounts. It sounds so obvious when you say it, but there are so many, again, people that we meet who have not put that on. So on your Twitter account, on your Instagram account, on your Facebook account, keep yourself less of a target to make it difficult for someone who might try and impersonate you, or someone who tries to take over your account, is to ensure that your or hack your account rather, is to make sure that that is turned on. Most of the platforms offer it in their like support, in their little FAQ section, so I won't walk you through it, but offer it in their little how-to guide. YouTube, you'd be able to find it. Like really look up, do a quick search on how to turn that setting as an extra security layer on. Another thing that so a lot of the work that we do is with at Code for Africa is very much around journalism safety and around activists' safety. And a lot of journalists and activists really work in spaces that are make their machines a lot more vulnerable. Another way that another kind of thing that we advise journalists to do, specifically who work on laptops that are also sort of connected to Wi-Fi, that like sort of public Wi-Fi, is really to do some things like work on a VPN. So one of the tools that we have that we offer to activists is a tool that is underwritten by Jigsaw, which is Alphabet. So it's the two arms of Alphabet, one being Google and one being Jigsaw, which is kind of managed by Jigsaw to some extent, that they offer to give to activists in order to keep their machines safe when you are working on public Wi-Fi specifically. Part of that also practically again is having a piece of tape, for instance, over your camera, if you're using a laptop or even on your phone, if you wanted to make sure that your phone camera isn't on all the time. And that also sounds sort of a bit like too sort of obvious, but it has meant that you can just switch it off if you are not wanting someone to see you on camera, if you're doing sort of work that might put you in some more physical danger in that sense. Also, then there's no one who can see sort of what your background looks like and things like that. So my next recommendation, and I'll move over to a slide deck in a second, is thinking about the tools that you use that kind of save your own mental health. And one of them could be, setting it up that you can only check your Instagram feed every sort of 5 hours, or setting up a time limit that sort of saves your, or maybe not Instagram, but your Twitter account, that saves you from kind of having the constant notifications that come through in order to sort of save a bit of that sanity as such. But there's also tools that you can use that filter out a lot of your notifications, so that if there's a lot of noise, if you've posted something online and you're being harassed as such, you're able to kind of turn on the tool, and I'll run you through the one that we recommend, to turn that tool on and go, okay, I am not going to be speaking to every single troll. A lot of it is just going to be sort of noise around me, and I won't have to see any of that. One of the tools that we use that I would recommend for that is something called Block Party app. And it sets it up. You can either put together a block list, you can put together rules and regulations for or rules rather in place that works on Twitter in order to say, I don't see any accounts that were started in March 2023. So that they're brand new accounts. They have followers who are under 100. Those are very often accounts created quickly to kind of troll a number of people, kind of quickly. So they're used as sort of a part of a bot network of attacks. So you can kind of set together those rules for yourself and see sort of what is the thing that keeps you safe online, both mentally, but also not having to be bombarded with notifications, which in the end means that your own voice is silenced, because nobody wants that kind of bombardment. And then what happens is specifically women tend to not post on Twitter anymore, or post on any of the social platforms, is because you're essentially being shouted down all the time. And in order to prevent that, there are these very quite straightforward tools to put in place that kind of protects your own voice a little bit more. So I'm going to share my screen if you give me 1 second. Cool, thank you. So one of the tools we use, it's in partnership with Jigsaw, with Twitter, and a number of our kind of ongoing partnerships that we work in collaboration with, was to build this thing called Feed Shield. It's based on Jigsaw's tool that's called Online Harassment Manager. And essentially what this does is two things. One is let me show you what it looks like. So it is go back one step. Sorry, it is open source. So there are organizations that adapt it in order to work in their own within their own organizations. We have readapted it to be Feed Shield. It specifically focuses on African countries in order to kind of help support women and women activists on the continent. So this is what the tool looks like. I'll also show it to you online. So it does two things. The one is that you've got to log in with your own Twitter account. It's not able to, on the site, it also explains no one is able to post on your behalf. No one is able to unfollow anything. But what you're able to do there is also set up rules of the kinds of accounts that you don't necessarily want to see. So you're able to put together rules of the kinds of words essentially that are used to target women specifically. So it works with machine learning. It recognizes, calling women a sort of a derogatory term. It recognizes that, and it has been trained. It uses a machine language model that's been trained to kind of recognize words currently only in English and French, but it's being rolled out in Kenya at the moment, that we're testing it in Kiswahili. So there are a number of other languages that we're trying to add, but of course, training models is not easy, and it requires a lot of data. So it's in the making at the moment, but at the moment, the big focus is kind of on English and then West African French. So the tool picks up language that is used often in derogatory ways against women and starts filtering that out. And the more that those terms are learnt, the faster it is to kind of filter out what the purpose is, or what those targeted words are. So you're able to start looking at your feed without seeing the kind of harassment that's been thrown your way. Another thing that the tool does is offers I wonder if I can show it to you. No, give me 1 second. Sorry, let me show what it looks like on my screen, actually. Can you see my screen still? Okay, great. So this is what the tool looks like when you go to feedshield.africa. You can see the kind of logging in. The next thing that it does is that we're able to both flag the abusive content, but then also create a network of women who face the same sort of targets. So you're able to connect with a therapist who can then in turn put you in touch with kind of support networks that help women both immediately, who are in rapid need of assistance, as well as a long-term plan of these are the groups that you would want to kind of click into and check in on one another, essentially. So playing a very sort of supportive role within each other, essentially. Another way that that this tool then works, the third sort of prong, I guess, is really to understand who are these actors that are targeting harassment. More than likely, you're not the only one that they're targeting. It is just that sort of latching onto a phrase, or latching onto deciding that when you say phrases like men always do this, there's sort of the people who put on searches for that and we'll see, oh, this person is always attacking men, and actually men are not like this, and we'll start responding in very horrible ways in order to silence women to not say kind of what situations they find themselves in. And so what you really want to do is understand who are the networks behind this trolling that's happening. So one way that you can do that is by logging into your data, you are able to download the history of your mentions, and specifically
working within a time zone. So you can sort of say from October 2022 to, end of November, depending on what kind of the time frame was that you had this very specific attack. And using that, being able to start looking at where the accounts are by downloading the document. This is where some of the work that we do come in with our PESA-Check, which is our fact-checking network, as well as other iLab, our investigative network, who you can contact and say, I've had this attack happen. I want to understand a little bit more about who the characters are. And they'd be able to work alongside you to look at whether it's coordinated. So is it a group that has specifically aimed harassment at you, or whether it just happens to be a sort of randomized group of people. From there, you'd really quickly be able to pick up whether it's you are kind of in line of sight of someone, essentially. Like, are they always saying, is there one group that's always saying the same thing to you, or is it again sort of a perchance that you've been harassed in this sense? The idea then there is also to see, is it a government that's harassing you? Is it a group of sort of anti whatever your cause is kind of that's harassing you? I mean, able to address it that way, as opposed to, again, shutting down like your own voice and your own your own voice, I guess, is the big way. So that's kind of the three tasks really that we roles that we really see this tool to be working as. I must add, we do a lot of training on digital security, and in the last kind of 5 years that it's been a field that I've been doing a lot of work in, there are always new things that happen. So it really is like not something that you can say, I've now done all the things and therefore I'm now kind of protected and safe. It really is something that develops all the time. And so you should, being part of communities like that, you're quickly able to learn what are other coping mechanisms, or what is some of the like digital technology that can be applied in order to continue your voice being heard, or continue being able to just exist in an activist or in a journalist role, and not have your own voice silenced. So it does really come down to, there are all these available fantastic digital tools, but being part of a community is really what's going to help drive your own digital safety and your own sort of security in that sense. Yes, I think that sort of sums up what I wanted to say. I will share the link for this tool that we use, and I really hope that you're able to get some use out of it, as well as giving us some feedback once you've kind of played on it and have some advice to share. I'd really love to hear from you afterwards. Thank you so much.
Amanda, thank you so much for that terrific final intervention and giving us really some practical advice, because, digital justice and the algorithm is sometimes so insurmountable and so incomprehensible, it feels beyond us. So it's wonderful to know that we can take care of ourselves in our day-to-day lives, in our day-to-day activism. And as you mentioned, this is really about community. And so thank you for the gift of something very practical to give to this community that has gathered here. So my friends, we have very little time left together. So I would like to add the voice of those who have gathered us from all over the world to the contribution. I guess we'll have time for about 2 questions, and then I'll offer a little summary, and then we'll move to a moment of prayer. So I see an excellent question challenging the church folk among us and the faith-based organization folk among us. So Diana has asked, what is your take on churches being a platform to perpetuate hate, especially towards the LGBTIQ+ community, and using the Bible as a tool to, misinterpret the word of God? So we've talked a lot about how the role of the churches is quite positive and constructive in terms of these digital spaces. But how do we challenge that for ourselves when we are the propagators of hate? Over to you.
Well, if I could start, I would say that is really a good and important question. And of course, this, what I call the 5 poisonous P's, is not something that is out there. it's also affecting the churches. And of course, there are groups within the churches who allow themselves to be instrumentalized in this global backlash and support it. And of course, since this is about values, it is desirable for those who want to push the backlash to even have the religious stamp on it, to make it even more legitimate. It is a huge challenge, because even if you know that you have the sound theology and that you have arguments and that you have all kinds of stuff to tell you that this is not right, the resources are often in the wrong place. I mean, that's a general problem. Why we're not in paradise is that there is a lot of money, but it happens often to be in the wrong place. And even here we see that groups that want to push against gender equality often are very, very well resourced. And I think the first step, as always, is to try to understand the mechanisms and then try to find ways of counteracting it that are honest and that are strong. And that is where we often, where we need meetings like this, where we share both the ideas behind, but also the practical, well, how do we do this, as Amanda just did.
Would anyone else like to weigh in on that, how the churches in these kind of questions of digital justice and in face of the algorithm might be in fact perpetrators of hate or of violence that we've talked so much about combating today? Does anyone else have a response to that?
I mean, I might say something briefly. I guess, first of all, I don't think that there is any one good solution. We have to work on several different levels with several different kinds of communities and different strategies appropriate to those settings. But for me, I think something that is really important is that the church needs to be ready and willing to criticize the church always. That we don't, and that's why I think it's helpful to be really a church of open doors that's willing to work with people of other faith communities, people of no faith community whatsoever, because at the end of the day, it's not about, the church doesn't exist for the sake of the church. The church exists for the sake of witnessing to God's love for the whole world and for the good of all who are in the world. And so in that perspective, I think that, individual churches are going to have to face difficult decisions where they at sometimes have to say, we're not going to do that. Not only are we not going to tolerate such hate speech, we're also going to criticize our own co-religionists for speaking out in such hateful and oppressive ways. So that's not like a solution or anything, but I do think that it's important to remember that we have to be willing to that the church has to be against the church sometimes.
Thank you for that. I have a somewhat related question about the role of faith communities in this, and then we'll move to close our event. So Yoti has asked about what about people who are not in faith communities but genuinely care for humanitarian issues? So of course, in any of our communities, these are mixed. Isn't it kind of discriminatory to have our sights set so clearly on churches and faith-based organizations? So perhaps Marvia or Emma or Gladys could take a turn at answering that.
I can start off if that's okay.
Go for it.
I think the important perspective to share here is that while faith communities are the advocates within wider communities, the primary people who are looking to help are not just found within communities, but those are, not just found within the faith communities, but those that are within local communities, because in essence, God is for those that are oppressed. And God is for those that are marginalized. And that doesn't just mean those within faith communities, but even surrounding communities and even interreligious communities, as Matthew was speaking about. And I think that is important to emphasize, that the advocacy might start initially from faith communities, but it isn't the end point, it's just the start. And inclusion of not just starting with faith communities, but also collaborating with other humanitarian groups and organizations, I think is essential for understanding different perspectives and moving forward in the digital age. Thank you.
Marvia, then Gladys, and then we'll close. Thank you so much. Marvia, please.
Right. Similarly, to endorse that, even though my presentation was talking about faith communities, that was really the approach of the question, but we are operating from that space in the wider society. Our programs are aligned with working with the communities around us, many of whom are not members of our churches. And also, if we should even take a project that is interfaith in my context, like working with persons with HIV and AIDS, which then has some of us as ministers working with LGBTQIA persons. This is the Jamaica Council of Churches steering committee, which is an interfaith committee. So we are having partnerships. This is not for us alone. And that was my emphasis on collaboration. We cannot do it alone.
And Gladys,
Yes,
over to you. Bring us
certainly.
home.
I want to agree with Mavia and Emma that while our work is usually within ecumenical actors, we have also realized that when we go to the ground, just like Emma has said, we are working with interfaith communities, but also communities that do not have a faith. But also one of the things that has been resoundingly talked about is working multi-stakeholder. So you're going to find that while we are ecumenical actors or even interfaith actors, we are working with feminist organizations that are able to reach out to different communities, including cultural institutions that are really important in demystifying some of these notions around masculinity, around gender equality and gender justice.
Gladys, thank you so much. And thank you to each of you for taking your time to prepare for this, to add your wisdom and experience that has taken far beyond these 2 hours to accumulate. It's a lifetime of all your experiences that you've brought to this digital room, and we are so grateful for you. And we've heard over and over again today about the importance of cultivating community and forging connections. And you can see just among the 8 of us here what kind of strength in the connections that you're already making and the differences and how that is such an enriching diversity. So I will be incredibly brief in my summary while we move to prayer. I've of course heard so many things that have, I've wanted to ask questions, and I know that you'll send along some resources to the participants today. I think we hear over and over again about the importance of scrutinizing power, whether it's tech power, political power, gender power, racial power, wherever power might be held in the terms of the algorithm, we have to scrutinize that and look at how that's impacting how we develop AI, how we use it, and the questions that we bring to this research. Again, what I just mentioned about the importance of cultivating community, these are historic questions. These are questions that will define not only our day-to-day lives, but this entire historic period that we're in. And so, of course, we cannot take this all on ourselves, that it's important to see as AI discourse kind of gains traction in the churches that we make connections and that we draw strength from these numbers, and that we see this not as an individual project, but the work of the church itself. Think intersectionally. We've heard this over and over again, that this is not a question about gender justice alone, but it's about how we perceive bodies generally, how patriarchy gets played out, how racism gets played out, how it impacts people's lives in the global north versus the global south, how it impacts ecology and how we perceive ourselves as, beings that are created in the image of God. And one of the concepts that really had a lot of influence in early Anglophone dialogue about artificial intelligence was the idea of a created co-creator. This was from Philip Hefner. And, that's kind of fallen to the wayside a bit, but I'm wondering if it's worth picking up again. And what does it mean to see ourselves as part of nature, as part of creation, and as part of these creative processes that bring about AI? And where do we see our relationship to nature in terms of digital things? And finally, take action. I think ultimately that's always the goal, that we can have nice conversations about it, but positioning the kind of the toolkits, the practical insight at the end was intentional. That it's important that we can think, all right, we have these challenges and we also have these opportunities, and what are we going to do with these as people of faith, as people of goodwill, as people who are committed to social and ecological justice? What's next? And I think what Amanda has offered to us, and also in the other contributions, are really definitely things that we can do today, as well as set our sights on in the coming years. So at the level of, protecting yourself online, to, advocacy at the national and international levels. So thank you to each of you for enriching our time together, and certainly enriching our lives as we increasingly live in an AI-directed world. And hopefully that will inspire us to continue to work hopefully in these spaces. So I will turn it over to, is it Nikki, I think, that will lead us in prayer to close our time together.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, guests all. We know that you could have been doing many other things, but you chose to be here with us, listening in, offering your thoughts, offering your contributions on how we can be better netizens in this very digital era. Let us go to God in prayer. And so, gracious God, we recognize that we are part of the problem, but we are also the solution. We recognize that we're amongst the vulnerable, even though we are also amongst the predators. We recognize, oh God, that this is a time, a kairos moment for change. And as we seek to be good stewards of our resources, of our time, and of our energies, we offer to you women, girls, boys, men, all members of your creation, human and otherwise, who are at risk because of the ways in which we seek to manipulate technology round about us. We pause particularly to ask for guidance as we implement the information and resources offered by our panelists. And we pray that we will be responsible stewards of that which you have placed in our care. Continue to bless, guide, and keep us. For this is our prayer, O God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.